On the banks of the mighty Murray River, this is Yoorrook country, the land of my ancestors. When the British arrived, my people were murdered here by settlers and even by police. These atrocities spread all over Australia, and the violence and the seizure of land was how our country was formed. But we've only really heard one side of the story. For 65,000 years, hundreds of Indigenous tribes thrived here, living through an ice age and alongside megafauna. This is one of the oldest continuous cultures in the world. When these lands were colonised, a violent invasion began. Tens of thousands of Aboriginal men, women and children were killed. They were shot, raped and poisoned across the frontier. Many more died of disease. Aboriginal people call it the killing times.
This has been swept under the rug for so long. These things actually happened.
For generations, Aboriginal people have called for non-Indigenous people to come to terms with the way Australia was settled.
I think it's too horrific for people to take on board that their ancestors, non-Aboriginal ancestors, were a part of this.
Across the globe, truth and justice commissions have uncovered atrocities in divided nations.
We all stand in need of healing.
Now, for the first time, it's Australia's turn.
Some of the things I've encountered in this research are the worst things I've ever heard of anyone ever doing to anyone in human history.
I did not know of the massacres, I'm ashamed to say.
It's absolutely wrong. We all have to take responsibility for it.
Some people were shocked that they didn't know about it. Why didn't we know about it? Why didn't we learn it at school?
This is the stuff that continues to cause harm today.
This 4-year Victorian Royal Commission is undertaking the most extensive investigation ever held into our dark past, even examining the legacy of a former Prime Minister. The unique thing about it is it's led by Aboriginal people. It's called Yoorrook.
Yoorrook means telling the truth, truth-telling. It's the Wamba word. We need to tell our story because they don't really know the true story of what happened to us.
For Aboriginal elders like Yoorrook leader Paul Briggs, the violence of the past is ever present.
They're frightened, no, they don't know what to do.
In recent years, Uncle Paul says an elderly non-Indigenous man approached him to divulge a long-held family secret.
He said his grandfather would sit him down on his knee and talk to him about the hunting that happened. You know, they'd go out on the weekends hunting. And he said, Paul, you know, they were out hunting your people. He grew up in the same region I grew up, but he needed to talk about it. He felt the need to talk about it and tell somebody. We're the First Nations peoples. We've lived on our...
Uncle Paul told this chilling story to the Yoorrook Truth-Telling Commission.
The respect and value of First Nations peoples. I think the truth-telling lies with non-Aboriginal people. It's quite well documented what happened and what's happening to First Nations peoples right around the country. But it's not clear what non-Aboriginal people feel and do about it, about their part of it, their ownership of it.
For Uncle Paul, reconciliation remains elusive because of what he says is a denial of history.
I think it's rooted in this lack of understanding, this lack of respect and value, and this sense of belief that it was a peaceful colonial acquisition of country that was allowed to happen, and Aboriginal people sort of peacefully let them have it.
would say, 600-700 hours driving around since I've been to the Commission, just hours and hours on the road.
We're with Commissioner Travis Lovett on the way to his ancestors' land at Portland, southwest of Melbourne. He's met with hundreds of people investigating the impact the loss of land and resources has had on his people.
I've had cups of teas in people's front yards and backyards and at their dining table, but also sat in formal spaces because not everything happens in the big city of Melbourne as well.
As an Aboriginal Commissioner, this has been gruelling and deeply personal work.
It does take its toll. There's days where you just go like, am I doing enough? Have I done enough? Because it's not only our people that have hoped for us getting this right, it's also important for non-Aboriginal people as well that we get this right.
Every day, he sees the link between the historic decimation of his people and the challenges of today.
Our people are 10 times more likely to engage in homelessness services, which is just incredibly sad to hear that.
Yeah, that's just shocking.
15 times more likely to be incarcerated in a Victorian jail system. 22 times more likely to come in contact with child protection. So this is, incredibly important truths that we're uncovering, but also why the system needs to change.
Travis's mob were the first to experience colonisation in what's now Victoria. They're often known as the Fighting Gunditjmara.
You walk this land, you feel a different spirit here. You feel our ancestors walking around. You feel how they were treated. We're here, and that's why we're called the Fighting Gunditjmara, because we resisted, and we'll continue to resist. Hey. How you going?
I'm so good. How are you?
Yeah, good.
Oh, it's so good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Travis has come to Portland to meet with Gunditjmara woman Keisha Day.
Because I reckon I read more about you than I see you, isn't that right?
Yeah, probably. At the moment, yeah.
Keisha is one of more than 1,200 Aboriginal people who've given evidence to Yoorrook.
We talk a lot about Portland being Victoria's birthplace, but in order for there to be a birthplace, there has to be a death place. And there's a lot of death places that exist here.
Today, Keisha's bringing us to the convincing ground, 10 minutes from her home in Portland. Yoorrook has heard it was the site of Victoria's first recorded massacre that happened sometime between mid-1833 and mid-1834.
It's a really peaceful place that tells a really non-peaceful history. And as you can see, we have...
It's here that a group of Gunditjmara people were killed by whalers. It's said there were only 2 survivors from a whole clan.
So that's a mass loss of life for tribes along this coastline.
Yes, absolutely. And it's the reason why we stand here and we tell this story over and over again, because those fellas that died deserve to have their truth told, and they deserve to have that peace as well.
Soon after, in November 1834, one family led by 2 brothers, the Hentys, sailed into Gunditjmara country at Portland Bay. Squatters quickly seized land, water and resources from the Gunditjmara people. They realised they could defy the orders of the Crown and occupy land to make a profit.
So when you talk about the reign of terror of the Henty brothers, you only have to look at George Augustus Robinson's diaries, who was a self-appointed historian of the time. And he talks a lot about the terror campaign of the Hentys and their fellow colonisers.
The prejudices against the natives at Portland Bay by Messrs Henty and Blair and Tyers is very considerable. They went so far as to say they thought they were hardly human.
As the so-called chief protector of Aborigines for the region, Robinson's field journals span over a decade and detail some of the early settlers' brutality.
These poor creatures are worse treated than slaves. They are made use of and are destroyed with impunity. The settlers at the bay spoke of the settlers up the country, dropping the natives as coolly as if they were speaking of dropping crows.
For generations, the colonial history of southwest Victoria was celebrated. Back in 1984, the town marked the 150th anniversary of European settlement with colonial costumes, cannons and cake. 40 years later, the Henty name is still everywhere in Portland. From the pub, to a highway, to monuments dedicated to the family.
I wanted to kick off by talking about colonisation here.
Keisha told the Yoorrook commissioners she wants the monuments taken down and more recognition of Gunditjmara people.
These colonisers continue to be celebrated through monuments on lands that they stole. And the people that they stole it from still have to bear witness to them. We have been waiting for something like Yoorrook since colonisation. Truth-telling is something that this colony known as Australia needs. We need the truth. We need to speak on what the colony costs for First Nations people.
Do you often come across Australians who tell you they don't know about this history?
Every day I hear people say, I didn't know about this, why didn't I learn? And again, I understand that because I went through the Australian schooling system as well. We're not asking people to say sorry, but we're asking people to open their minds, to open their hearts to the full story.
As settlers moved across the country, so did the massacres. Historical records are incomplete and we'll never know the true number of people who were killed. But University of Newcastle researchers have found the most massacres occurred during the 1840s. The Commission heard that many killings were covered up. Yoorrook is now investigating whether this code of silence has shaped Australia's treatment and understanding of First Nations people today.
Not many Australians have been willing to think of what happened at sites like Warrigal Creek and many others throughout Australia.
Some unmarked massacre sites lie on farms now owned by non-Indigenous families.
Farming is challenging alone, and it takes a passion and a real determination to keep going.
Elizabeth Balderstone's life changed forever when she came to this property in Gippsland as an 18-year-old in 1974. It's where she met and fell in love with her husband Alistair, whose family had farmed here since 1910. They married and had 2 daughters.
We were all very happily living here, and I'd become quite involved in the operation of the family partnership and the farming side of things. And then tragically in 1987, when the girls were just 4 and 2, Alistair, who was a very competent rider, had a fall from a horse and never regained consciousness. So in those moments and days, life just changed immeasurably for me.
Elizabeth made the decision to stay on the farm and carry on the family's legacy.
It became very much home, and despite the sort of huge sadness I'd had, I at least felt a real purpose and sense of place here.
Alongside the beauty, there's a sense of heartache embedded in this place too. That's because the family has always known this stately property was built overlooking a massacre site.
There's many historians who've written a lot on this and researched in depth the story of what happened here. And there were clearly issues and skirmishes between the traditional owners and the settlers, and culminated in mid-1843 the murder of a fellow Ronald McAllister, who was the nephew of a very wealthy pastoralist from New South Wales. In retaliation for the murder of Ronald, it's understood that a group of settlers, known now as the Highland Brigade, got together and came upon a large group of Bratalung people camped at Warrigal Creek at the waterhole.
Historical records are patchy. University of Newcastle researchers now estimate that at least 125 men, women and children were shot dead in a 5-day rampage in the area. In 1925, a Gippsland magazine published this anonymous account of the massacre.
Some escaped in the scrub, others jumped into the waterhole, and as fast as they put their heads up for breath, they were shot until the water was red with blood. I knew 2 blacks who, though wounded, came out of that hole alive. One was a boy at that time, about 12 or 14 years old. He was hit in the eye by a slug, captured by the whites, and made to lead the brigade on from one camp to another.
I think any of us can imagine the scene of horror that was unfolding, and the power of men on horseback and firearms. It's very hard for anyone to visit Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, given the story and the understanding of what's happened.
It would have been a shocking, frightening experience for them. They were used to hand combat, face to face. This other method of killing was something quite foreign to us.
In an unusual move, Elizabeth Balderstone has fenced off the site and invited traditional owners to come here as often as they like.
Yangai! Gunditjmara, Russell Mullett. Saying hello to the spirits. They're there. You know,
When local Gunaikurnai elder Uncle Russell Mullett first visited the farm, he was wary.
My feeling at the time was a bit of trepidation, feeling like I just hope that I'm meeting people that understand a little bit about the history of the place. Obviously, waterway.
Russell and Elizabeth now have a firm friendship and a shared connection to a tragic chapter in Australian history.
It may not be something you want to delve into, but it's about the truth. It's about digging into a history that is in the past being covered and trying to find a common ground that we can communicate on and talk respectfully to each other.
Why do you think there is perhaps a reluctance from other landholders to do what you've done?
I think a lot of landholders probably fear that talking up will mean there could be claims on their country, restrictions on how they farm, that veil of secrecy that we don't want these things to be talked about. But, you know, the flow on of not talking about them is awful.
What happens if we don't talk about them?
Well, I don't think we can go forward as a nation.
For Russell, looking on at this massacre site represents a catastrophic loss, but also the fight for life.
That's been the history that we've fought, a history of recognition, history of survival.
The Commission has already heard a vast amount of evidence on what the violence of the past has done to Indigenous people today.
Victoria had so many massacres. It was brutal, absolutely brutal.
Professor Eleanor Burke is the chair of the Yoorrook Justice Commission. The 81-year-old made the decision to come out of retirement to give her people a chance to change the record.
Well, I'm feeling very tired these days. But no, it's the most important thing I will have ever done in my life. The most important thing, and there's no question about that.
Auntie Eleanor has an intimate understanding of Australia's history. As a child, she saw these divides clearly in black and white.
I was the only Aboriginal person in a school of 40 students, and they reacted, the racist way, just get beaten up and knocked off my bike and this sort of stuff until I got some bigger cousins come and they dealt with it. But it was only because I was Aboriginal.
For most of her life, she's been on the front line in every major fight for Indigenous rights.
She died because she was poor.
At the Commission, Auntie Eleanor has spent almost 4 years listening to testimony from survivors of horrific abuses.
We had 5 Aboriginal people die in custody in Victoria. I'm sorry.
Some of the most heartbreaking things at times.
It's okay, I'll calm down.
And you get thanked for listening. I find that, uplifting but tragic.
Because no one has listened before?
That's right. The overwhelming relief sometimes, even the most harrowing scenarios, and some of them are shocking,
On the first day Four Corners visits, the Commission is preparing for a significant moment. Non-Indigenous Australians are coming forward with their own truths to tell. A nervous Elizabeth Balderstone is up first.
We good to go, and how's my microphone?
To give you an opportunity to explain to the Commission.
It's an emotional morning as Elizabeth recounts the story of the Warrigal Creek Massacre.
It's a burden, I guess, for us as a family and for me living there to know we're caring for this site.
Your growth as a person.
She makes a plea to other Australian farmers to connect with Aboriginal communities.
One of my hopes from today is that other landholders see that and let go that angst of worrying that land will be resumed or impacts on what they're wanting to do. I mean, it's a shared journey and I hope that others will see that.
Her evidence has a big impact on the commissioners.
These are things that we feel deeply, and I really appreciate your insights and your understanding to some extent about how we can feel, because clearly you treasure what you've got for the future, not just for now, but for the future. And so I thank you very much for your contribution today.
Thank you for showing leadership as well in the community. Just appreciate you coming here today and sharing the truth.
Thank you. Thank you.
There's the opportunity around transferring part of her property back to traditional owners. The traditional owners didn't ask for that to happen. That was derived purely from Elizabeth Balderstone and her family coming and going, what can we do to contribute to what has happened?
What would you say to Australians out there who might be watching this, who are grappling with their own families' histories and their ties to colonisation?
There's nothing to be scared of, nothing to be worried about. It also helps our people heal as well, because this has been swept under the rug for so long about the injustices that our people have faced, because it is scary, it's frightening, it's confronting.
The Commission is also investigating what happened after the massacres. From the mid-1800s, the government made another attempt to eliminate Aboriginal people by absorbing them into white society. They were forced onto reserves known as missions, where their lives were controlled and cultural practices and languages were forbidden.
Yeah, it's had a significant impact on our people.
Travis Lovett has taken us onto the old Lake Condah mission.
What's the significance of this mission, Lake Condah mission, where we are now in southwest Victoria, to your own family?
Yeah, it's deep personal connection first and foremost. Like, I feel quite emotional every time I come home. There's facts and evidence that state that.
After his family were rounded up here, some of Travis's relatives were stolen from this mission as children.
People were taken from here. My dad wasn't taken from here, but his siblings were taken from this country, this land here. It's deeply troubling, and again, this is the stolen generation.
These are the remnants of the segregation era in Australia, aren't they?
They sure are. They're a continual reminder that of the segregation around our people from non-Aboriginal people. We were never ever considered as equals. And again, treated horrifically for just being born as an Aboriginal person. They'd done nothing wrong, and then they were treated horrifically. And people don't get over that. This is government policy of the day to remove us from our land and enable some of our people who had lighter skin to be able to move off, to basically wipe out our race, is what the intention of that was. It was to wipe out our people, and that where there was lighter skinned or not known as full bloods, we were able to, at that point in time as Aboriginal people, be able to be moved off the missions and integrated into society.
Fourth-generation Victorian Peter Sharp long wondered why such a cruel policy existed.
Always in my mind was, where did this start? The last thing I ever expected was to find this with this missing pieces of this puzzle that was in my mind within my own family history.
His great-grandfather, Alfred Deakin, was always a cherished figure in his family as the so-called father of the Australian Federation.
I was always aware from quite an early age that he had been an early Prime Minister of Australia. There was always a strong reference to Federation and his involvement with that.
7 years ago, Peter Sharp made a chilling discovery about his great-grandfather.
All of a sudden, bang, 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 everything fell into place.
He started to dig. He's now spent years painstakingly examining archives and public records.
He was the Chief Secretary. He passed the Half-Caste Act. And it was just like, I just sent just a shiver down my spine to realise, because I just knew at that moment this just changed everything.
In 1886, as Chief Secretary in Victoria, Alfred Deakin passed a notorious law, the Aborigines Protection Act. It's often known by the offensive term, the Half-Caste Act. This law redefined Aboriginality. It meant that people of mixed descent could then be forced off missions to assimilate into the white colonial world.
That an Indigenous population could just be merged into the general population.
Some historians characterise Deakin as a friend of Aboriginal people, but it's known that he introduced this racist law, and Peter Sharp believes his great-grandfather wanted to erase Aboriginal people.
had an ideal that the continent is reserved for Anglo-Saxons only. He had this ideal to follow and he wasn't going to ever let go of it.
He says his analysis suggests Deakin made calculated amendments to the bill and rushed it through Parliament to get his way.
It's the oldest trick in Parliament, surely, that if you want something to remain hidden, you pass it on the last day, the last few minutes of the session, the last minutes of the year. I thought, there's something hidden here. This isn't all it appears to be on the surface. And every inch of the way I've gone since then, I'm more and more convinced that that's what happened. It was very deliberate, meticulously planned.
So did your research confirm to you that your great-grandfather had an active or a pivotal role in the genocide of Aboriginal people?
I believe so. I have said that if there was one person, one single person, most responsible for the Half-Caste Act and the stolen generations, it could be Alfred Deakin.
The 1886 Act in Victoria proved to be catastrophic, leading to the mass removal of children. Other states adopted similar laws. It was the architecture for the stolen generations. Several generations after the 1886 Act was passed, the repercussions are still felt acutely by First Nations people.
I do understand that it might seem that this is my family story, but in a much bigger way, it's your family story.
Yeah, I think I can't help but reflect on what happened to my people after this law was passed. Yeah, sorry to get emotional, but yeah, it's pretty profound. And then when you think about the effect it had on all Aboriginal families I know, all across the country, really. So even though it's just words on a page, it feels much bigger to me than just this, and I guess that's why it feels bigger to you too.
It has to be read as it was, because it's what was said and what was done and what was planned. And I think it has to shock in order for it to be...
For it to be fully absorbed.
To tell the truth. You can't, if you say it in any other way, it's not telling the truth. And I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yeah.
Peter has made a bold decision to put this apology and his painful story on the public record forever.
My name is Peter Sharp. I always believed or guessed that dispossession of First Peoples after the invasion must have involved massacres. It came as a shock that a member of my own family had enabled the attempted elimination to be put into law. I would have felt ashamed of myself if I didn't, because it's a story that needs to be told. It's the truth. To all those viewing who themselves or whose families have been and still are being impacted by the introduction of laws and policies in which a member of my family played such a significant role, I say that I am personally profoundly sorry.
This turns out to be one of the toughest days for Commissioner Travis Lovett.
Can I just jump in here? Thanks for that, Peter. I'd like to ask Council if we can just have a 5-minute adjournment, if that's okay.
Certainly.
Thank you. And we'll come back in 5 minutes. reflect on my grandparents who lived with the trauma around having their children taken from them in front of them, basically, and snapped up as well. My grandfather, he went to World War II to come back and then have basically his children taken. I can't even fathom, and I remember some of the yarns I had, and he hardly ever spoke. I'm not going to apologise for being emotional because, this is, again, this is our lived experience,
And you've actually found some historical material.
Retired Judge Anthony North is the only non-Indigenous commissioner, and this evidence has also shaken him.
These laws were designed to assist the elimination of First Nations people. These are the facts we heard. These are the truths we heard. But for non-Indigenous people like me, there has been silence. We did not know of the horror of our history. We did not know the harm inflicted on First Nations people. And we did not know the ongoing damage, which, as we heard, continues to this day. This Truth Commission was created with a vision of a better Victoria, a Victoria which has come to terms with its dark history. No longer can we, in the non-Indigenous community, say that we did not know.
With the powers of a royal commission, this Aboriginal-led inquiry can subpoena documents and compel witnesses. The commission has even called the Premier of Victoria, Jacinta Allen.
I hand this over, Premier, to you to be able to hold with you today, to be able to come forward to be a part of this process and establishing a true history of Victoria on the official public record forever as well.
I have learnt much that I did not know. I did not know of the massacres, I'm ashamed to say. And I was sitting there in my backyard reading through the materials and just felt so distressed that these were massacres that occurred not far from where I was sitting and I didn't know about them. It brings me a sense of shame and distress personally that I did not know that. And it brings me a sense of shame and distress that this was done. This was done by people all in the pursuit of taking land off First Peoples.
And indeed, the state of Victoria has received many, many times over the benefits of that process of dispossession, has it not?
Yes, it has.
So was that a surprise that the leader of Victoria didn't even know about the massacres that had occurred in her own backyard?
It was a shock, and it really immediately reinforces the point about our education, and it's just the reality of education in this country, really. We don't give priority, and from my point of view, it's disappointing. It should be foundational.
Now, coming to the estimated amount and value of gold removed.
The Commission's lawyers have grilled the government on why Aboriginal people have been locked out of vast amounts of wealth.
The volume of gold extracted since 1851 from Victorian lands.
It's about $287.4 billion.
There has never been an accounting for that wealth for First Nations people, has there?
That's correct.
It appears the total revenue received by the Victorian government from water for the 13-year period is just over $83 billion. How much of the $83 billion revenue has been distributed directly to First Nations?
The answer is zero directly.
You got quite emotional several times today.
Yoorrook has confronted bureaucrats and ministers.
It's wrong. What has happened is absolutely wrong. We all have to take responsibility for it and fix it.
On behalf of Victoria Police,
I formally and unreservedly apologise for police actions that have caused or contributed to the trauma experienced by so many Aboriginal families in our jurisdiction.
Without going into detail about the...
But for all the theatre in the room, the Yoorrook commissioners are tired of broken promises.
Well, what's your reaction to the fact that there
I
was...
want to be really clear here, though, that government have known about all these injustices the whole time. You know, through this process, we have got, at a minimum, 10,000 documents from government. It was plain in black and white. The government knew already. The challenging thing that people don't understand is that there's never been accountability.
Here's where we belong. Sing up country.
Yoorrook has amassed a vast body of evidence about the enduring effects of colonisation on First Nations people. It's already called for a major overhaul of the criminal justice and child protection systems. In June, it'll issue a final blueprint on redressing injustices in land and water, education, health and housing.
If our recommendations are implemented, they have to make a difference. They must make a difference.
What was here before?
Be brave, be bold, and do the right thing.
Do you feel the pressure? Do you feel the stakes are high for this?
Oh, incredibly high. This is the most important work I'll probably ever do in my life. And it's not a burden. I want to be really clear on that. It's not a burden, but it's something that weighs on my mind on a regular basis, because we've got to get this right. We've got to get this right.
It's now on the public record that Aboriginal people have suffered mass human rights abuses, and the Victorian government has agreed it's time to make amends.
First Peoples Assembly gift.
The next crucial step is agreeing on a deal, the country's first formal treaty. This ceremony marks the beginning of negotiations.
But we have resisted. We have survived. And now treaty is about striking a fairer deal.
There is no one that can say that this isn't history unfolding, because that's exactly what it is.
Now a new generation of black leaders must take the pain of the past to fuel a modern fight for survival.
The journey to get to this point has been a long one. The determination and activism of our people have kept those fires burning.
But there's anxiety here too. After the failure of the Voice referendum, neither Anthony Albanese or Peter Dutton support a federal truth-telling inquiry. The Northern Territory and Queensland have also shelved their commitments to truth-telling and treaty. And as political will on Indigenous affairs wanes, these Aboriginal leaders know this is a race against time. In many ways, uncovering the truth has been a simpler task than resolving the question of how we reconcile with Australia's history.
The hard thing is making sure the change happens that truth should bring.
It's about knowing that history and accepting it and not tucking it away. Australia can only be a better place if we all understand each other.
It's our ancestral obligations, and it's our obligations to future generations that we will continue, that we will always be here.
If this program has raised any concerns for you, you can contact 13 Yarn on 13 92 76.